Evening, testing, 1, 2, 3. Boy, that is a Paul's got to put it, he wants to put it up. She wants to look at the agenda. It's on the first slide of my,
Beekeeping ordinance?
yeah, if you bring up the one that's the full version, then we can edit it.
I just have two different beekeeping ordinances, I don't know which is which.
One's a PowerPoint show and one's a,
Show.
yeah.
They're different sizes, so.
Hey, how are you? Good.
Yeah.
toy-based report? Don't need a podium. Oh, probably do. Ah, there it is.
I even brought some brush here to show that they have to go.
You cut yourself with it?
No. Oh, I know they are. But I had two friends who live on the property where one of my beekeepers are. They just want the experiment. So they, so as we got tired, we would go,
Okay. So they came and worked for you?
they came and helped out.
Yeah, that's what I was
They know that you don't know how to do it. I tried to buy it. He said somebody was one of the orange. Orange right there.
Everybody sign the sign-in sheet. Sign-in sheet, make sure you sign the sign-in sheet so we'll keep track of you, or if you want to be on our email list, we need to make sure that we have you on the sign-in sheet. We'll get started here.
I signed me.
Someone brought their telephone. Hey, that's mine. I looked for mine to bring it, but unless they're used it. That's my show and tell.
If you're gonna be standing over here, what I wanna do is,
I can't stand right there, I'm like behind it.
no, I'm turning this more towards you and the room, and then you can,
How do I get away from that thing?
you stand off to the side.
Okay.
The way to get away from the blinding light is to not stand directly in front of it.
Okay. I just brought show and tell stuff. Oh. Have you seen this? I was a magazine major. So it's a brand new periodical.
major in magazines?
I could in the 80s.
Wow, cool.
So it's just glorious and beautiful and well written.
Really
and
nice.
It's glorious. So this was the first
Oh,
one, and so I was going to show that to people and encourage
Cool.
them to sign up and kind of
read more people,
Well,
read
you
more,
know,
everybody.
you can, it's just
Hey
nice.
folks, I'd like to make a quick announcement. My name's Dan, a relatively new member of the Bee Association here. I have taken over for Jeanette temporarily and running the raffle. We have 10 items up here. Hat, t-shirts, candle holders, some subscriptions to Bee Culture, draw money for Bee for Honey Drop Off. One ticket is $1, and you get 6 tickets for a good 5 spot. So, if you're interested, please come on up.
How much does the ticket cost?
I just said they're $1, you get 6 for 5. You're fired.
Oh, okay, we're gonna have more mercy. It's our first meeting. We're gonna be more merciful than that. got your lids, we got your lids right over there. We good? What? Thank you. So did I show you this? I don't know if you like it. Yes, dear. As our thank you to them for letting us meet here. So if you want to buy honey from our hives, it'll be here at the Coal Creek Park Nature Center. Then I also have a couple of show and tell items. I want to remind everybody that as of right now, the Fall Beekeepers of Indiana meeting is still on in Muncie. It's the weekend before Halloween. The weekend before Halloween, whatever that date is. I don't have a calendar. It will be in Muncie, so easy drive for us. And who's the speaker? Jim, do we know who the speaker is?
For the
The fall meeting in
I
Muncie.
don't. I'm sorry. It's somebody from University of Minnesota, I believe.
No, we thought that, and it's not. It's not Megan Milbrace.
Okay, so we know it's not.
We know that it is not. And we'll look that up in 1.5 minutes here while I keep
I'll
talking.
get an answer.
Let's see, I brought some show and tell items. If you're into periodicals, this is a new publication that's available. 2 Million Blossoms is the name of it. These are the first two times it came out this year. I think it's a quarterly. Have them up here for you to look at. It's got all pollinators, not just honeybees. It's a beautifully produced periodical. And I think they have a digital version as well. If you want to see it in a digital version, you can look that up. 2 Million Blossoms.
Jay Evans.
I'm sorry?
Jay Evans from the USDA ARS Research Station.
Very nice. Everybody hear that? Jay Evans from the USDA Research Station. Is that in Maryland?
Yeah, the Beltsville Station.
Okay, so that is the speaker. This is another little novelty that I don't know that it's a novelty. It might be very useful. This is a frame to use after you pull your honey supers and you want to do a mite treatment or use a mechanical method for mite control rather than a chemical method. Now, I use oxalic acid vapor, but even oxalic acid vapor can have a detrimental effect on the bees, and this is to allow you to create a brood break without causing serious reflexive action by your hive because you've pulled the queen and taken her away. This allows you to catch your queen using this beautiful little pipette and put her in this larger cage, in this frame, in the hive. And you keep her in there for 2 to 3 weeks. They never feel queenless. They don't react by making queen cells, getting upset. She's still there. She can't lay eggs. They can draw out this frame. In the meantime, you've created a brood break to diminish or reduce your mite population without making them upset. There's no side effects, as it were, to making a treatment like this, and you do this right after you pull your honey supers. I bought this from Triad Bee Supply in North Carolina, along with the little queen catcher, and you pull the little sponge out, and you're able to put that over your queen and draw her up in, and then you can transfer into here. So we have one that we're going to raffle off at some point. Jeanette bought one for the raffle, but I wanted you to see it because I think it's a great idea. Lots of people are very hungry for non-chemical related ways to treat for mites, and this is a great one, so I wanted you to see that. Another item I brought was this. How many of you know what this is?
Wooden.
It's not the right season, but I brought it anyway. This is a candy board. We'll be making these later in the fall or preparing them for our hives for winter, but I wanted you to see it or be able to see it to make your own in preparation for having these ready. We totally recommend candy boards for hives in this weather, this climate for the winter. This is just hardware cloth on a frame. We add granulated sugar, a little bit of water, some Honey Bee Healthy, pack it in, tissue paper, that's what that is. And then not only is it a food supply if they need it, the most important thing it does is mitigate moisture in your hive. Moisture is going to kill more bees in the winter than starvation. So candy boards, be thinking about them, preparing for them. You can buy them like this, I'm sure, from Baston and RJ, or you can build your own. So I just wanted to remind you that that time is coming. Please get ready. Who are our speakers next month? Is it Bob Bruner next month? You know, next month? Hang on. Okay. Also brought this. How many people are signed up with Field Watch? Field Watch. It's a free service. You can register your crops or your bees with Field Watch. So when licensed sprayers are going out to do agricultural spraying or spraying for mosquitoes or whatnot, they are to look up what is in their spray zone to see if there are areas that they need to stop. And in fact, I live next door to a city park, and there's a creek that runs between me and the park, and my husband saw someone spraying on the other half and went out and said, "Hey, were you just spraying down?" "Oh, no, we saw you're registered." "Nope, we do not spray down there." So I have firsthand experience that at least in that occasion, it did work. So Field Watch, Bee Check, look it up, it's free, you should do it. Who's speaking next month? Bob Bruner? Maybe?
Barry for mineralization, B101, mite treatment by Tim.
Okay. And I think Bob Bruner was the other one with Barry.
Okay.
So Bob Bruner leads Putnam County Beekeepers out in Greencastle, has been a beekeeper since he learned how to keep bees in junior high in New Jersey. They taught it on the roof of the school. Who would have thought? So he will be coming to talk to us because he winters over all his colonies in one deep and a super. Doesn't matter how big they've gotten in the summer, he brings it all back to a small containment always. I was very interested to hear about that. A lot of times I feel like I have trouble overwintering in two deeps because they sort of abandon the bottom one. So I was just interested to hear why he does it, how he does it, and how it works for him. So he'll be here. Barry McNulty from our club will also be talking about winterizing. Anything else? Oh, and we will be having Beekeeping 101. Part 1. So if you have anybody who's a complete 100% newbie and wants to do our free Beekeeping 101, that's a 2-part, 2-month attendant thing. It's not a repeated, it's 2 separate parts, one's in September, one's in October, and that goes on at the same time the regular meeting is going on here. Right? Anything else? Am I good? Any questions? Yes, sir. You're good? Who's going to, Peg, want to report on the hive inspection? And I will leave.
Okay, hive inspection. Is this month good, okay, Paul?
Yeah.
All right. Last month, we were in the hive. Okay, back up. 2 months ago, we split it. Okay? And then we played walk-away split. And we were like playing guess where the queen is. Well, we guessed wrong and lost a free $40 queen in the process.
Dad, what's a walk-away split?
Just what it says. You put the boxes in 2 parts and walk away, and one's going to be fine and one is either The supers we're gonna pull those off and treat them for mites, in the coming probably week or two. I'll put in apple bar. Pull the supers, put the apple bar in, and then we looked in the top and they were collecting nectar and capping honey, which is what we want. We didn't go down into the bottom box. We didn't have enough time. We'll do that next month. No, we won't, because they'll be apple barred up. But anyway, so far the hive is doing very well, and it was great to see when we had four or five people there. Take a look, even a young man there with no gloves and nothing on his legs. He made it through standing right next to the beehive. You don't want to do that again, but it worked this time. So please come back next time we do the hive inspection to see how things are going. Thanks very much. And this hive has produced, like I said, like Tracy said, upwards now of 58 1-pound containers this year, and they've all gone to Cool Creek to sell. And who's next? Tracy? Want to introduce our speaker? The one and only?
How many of you have either made a call or received a call from someone else saying, I think I have bees in my siding, my gutters? Anybody have friends reach out and say that to you? Okay, so Mr. Bill Wren is probably the specialist in this area who comes and looks over the situation and does what we call cutouts. If the beekeeper has to get into your house construction-wise and remove something, that's called a cutout. Not a lot of people do it anymore. I'll just tell you as a tip, if somebody tells you that they have that, the first thing you do is ask them to send you a picture. Don't drive all the way over there with all your stuff. So Bill is the number that I probably hand out 4 or 5 times a month to people all over the central Indiana area about doing cutouts, and he's here to tell us about that and how you got into that and why you're still doing it, you crazy man. So thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. So I've been into beekeeping about 4 years now. And my very first year, John Foster was doing a cutout on, what was that, about Sheridan? Yeah. So I said, hey, can I come along? And I've been hooked ever since. I can't remember how many I've done now. I'm trying to think of how many soffits, how many walls, how many ceilings, how many logs. I just lost track of it. I think I'm at about 5 tree logs right now that I've taken the chainsaw to, opened them up, and pulled the bees out. So I've made a list of things that I'd like to share with you, and hopefully everybody gets at least one nugget of knowledge that they didn't know before. It makes it a little bit easier in your own home bee yard. And I call this lessons from the cutout. I call it that because I don't want to teach you how to do cutouts. It's too hard. It takes too long. It's too heavy. It's too hot. It's too dangerous. Call somebody if you have to cut a wall open. If you have to cut a ceiling open to get your bees out, call Daniel. We've been working together this summer. So I'll give you some of the things that I've learned that maybe we can apply to our own home beehives. So with that being said, I don't want you doing cutouts. Because if you burn somebody's house down, I don't want you to say, I learned from Bill Wren how to do it. Because I'm telling you right now, don't do it. But if you do, stay hydrated. It's very important because it's very hot work. Because I know you understand what it's like to put your suit on in the summertime, go out and look at your bees for 20 minutes. Imagine that for 8 hours. It gets pretty tough. Bring an assistant if you can. Really, it's really that hard. You're going to need help. As far as finding the bees, I use a FLIR camera. It's a thermal imaging. It takes a picture of heat. And for the first time ever, I actually found where bees were cooler than the surrounding area.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I was shocked. I've never seen that before, because bees give off heat, and that's how you can find them in walls, in ceilings and such. They were in about 30 feet high in a gym wall, and the sun was beating down on the wall itself. I took a thermal image, and the cool spot was where the bees were. And that's in the works. A couple of Saturdays from now, we're going to get into that. There's also another type of camera that you might use for, like, if you're a mechanic. It's a long camera, it's like a long stem camera that you can bend and put around corners and through holes and things. That's a useful tool. And you would also like to have a quarantine yard for your newly acquired bees if you do. They can have various pests that you don't want to bring home to your good bees, beetles, mites, etc. It's a good idea to have a quarantine yard. So while I'm speaking, if you have questions, go ahead and ask. They're going to do the shepherd hook when I'm done, when it's time for me to go. Let's do our questions as we go, okay? Some things that I tell people that I have as assistants, that I tell them not to do, is not to blow smoke directly into homes. There's a fire in your smoker. Once in a while, an ember blows out. If you blow an ember into somebody's house, it catches on fire. You will never have another good place to live the rest of your life. So I'm telling you, don't ever blow smoke in somebody's house, just for safety's sake. And then I've also learned along the way, if you blow smoke onto honeycomb, that honey will actually get that smoke flavor. So it's probably best to use, hickory, make it taste good anyway. So I'm just going to go through my list of things. If you have questions, please ask. We're also live streaming, so if anyone online has a question, put that in the chat, and somebody's going to hand it to me. We'll address the questions online as well. So most beekeepers are used to their honeycomb being in straight rows, evenly spaced, straight up and down. In nature, that's not always the case. Honeycomb in nature can go any which way. So you may have a few straight rows, and then all of a sudden it's going to turn, then you'll have another diagonal set of rows. Bees don't need straight rows like we're used to. They'll make curves, they'll make diagonals. It's a very fascinating study. And if you ever get a chance to see someone doing a cutout, I would take the opportunity. I learned so much from my very first time with John. We had, it was a door. Someone had removed the whole door frame. The inner and outer door had bees between them. They'd cut that out of a building and tied it up to a tree somehow. It was, when we opened up, we took insulation off. There was a glass window about like so, and about like so, and it was like an observation hive out in the country. But those were the meanest bees. We had to keep our suits on, drive about a quarter of a mile away with our windows open before we could pull our veils off. Those, I think for our sake, those bees didn't make it. Is that right? I know they didn't make it. I'm kind of glad now. So it's harder than you think. It takes longer than you think. If there's ladder involved, your feet are going to hurt. So yeah. Some of the other things, and I'm going to show you the tools of the trade here in a minute, but I'm going to go through my notes. And please, questions, if you have them, go ahead and let me know. If you travel like I do, have a kind of a small vehicle, one thing that I learned the hard way is buckets that are stacked neatly when you leave the house don't pack very well when you fill them up with honeycomb and try to put them back in your car unstacked. That's another thing to keep in mind. The thing about drones, I've seen a lot of people on Facebook in their beekeeping groups panic when they see just the smidgen of drones between two frames. In nature, there's drones everywhere. I think I've read studies that say there's about 25% drones at any given time, and that's what I've been finding. When I cut open a natural beehive that nobody's been messing with, there's a significant amount of drones in there. So if you see drones in your beehive, don't worry about it. It's a very natural thing. Tracy?
I was just going to ask you, what's your limit that when you get there you go, no, absolutely not?
I haven't hit that.
Well, good to know.
I haven't hit that. Now I have taken a phone
So
call.
it's not height nor depth nor.
No, I have taken a phone call where the man says, well, I sprayed them.
Oh.
And that didn't work, so I sprayed foam in the hole, and that didn't work. And now we got dead bees all over our garage, and there's still bees flying out of the wall. And I said, you're on your own. If somebody's poisoned them, that's where, I guess that would be where I draw the line.
Okay.
If they say, yeah, I poisoned them, I'm not going.
Yeah, what's the win for you there? Nothing.
Yeah, I'm not going. If they've poisoned them, I'm not going. But no,
Okay.
I haven't hit my limit yet as far as difficulty.
Good to know.
I think I may be the one to call when the beekeepers show up and go, they're not doing it.
Okay.
That's when I get the call. I cut out of a 200-year-old home in Connersville last summer. We had to go through the 8-foot modern ceiling, the 10-foot vintage ceiling, and they were between the 2-foot brick wall and the floor joist in a gap about this big, and the nest was 10 feet long.
Wow.
Because it was compressed. It was only about this wide. It was about this wide, the height of a floor joist, 10 feet.
So, horizontal height then, like a horizontal.
Right.
Yeah, there you
So
go.
it was a horizontal height to the extreme. It was about a 10-foot long height.
Wow.
The house, it was about a 200-year-old house. The guy says it had been abandoned for about 20 years. The bees may very well have been there that long.
How long did that take you?
Solid 8 hours. And I had an assistant. So yeah, it was that. I would say that was the most physically demanding cutout I've ever done. I even went to the point of taking loose bricks and wiggled them out of their place so I could squeeze my hand up between the bricks and joists to get the bees out.
For your own YouTube channel.
I have a photographer. She's here with me.
All right.
I've had very easy cutouts. I've been to a home in Carmel. They said the bees moved in 2 days ago. They're right here. I sat down on the floor. I pulled a couple of pieces of cedar, and there they were. The piece of comb was about this big. One piece of comb. Vacuumed all the bees. I cut the little piece of comb. I put it in the nuke, and off I went. Super easy. In the shade. No ladder. I mean, there's varying degrees of difficulty when you're doing cutouts. And if you get a call that's no ladder, that's a plus.
Yeah.
In the shade, that's a plus. So yeah, don't worry about your drones. They're very natural. Bees have to have them. You have a question?
So do you have a written agreement that you don't have to repair whatever you damaged to that house, or, taking drywall off or whatever? Are you responsible for that? Do you have a written agreement?
It's situational. It's very situational. I have done repairs. I hesitate to do drywall because that's kind of a professional thing. I'll put boards back. If I simply pull boards off, I'll put the boards back. That's not an issue. I've had cutouts where the guy was tearing down the house. It's like, hey, I've pulled this wall down. There's bees in it. Can you come help me? Yeah, no problem. It was already, the backhoe had already clawed into the wall and pulled it. That's not the big deal. Most people, when I talk to them, we go over the different situations as far as, I'm going to cut a hole in your house as small as I can, and I'm going to reach up in there and I'm going to pull a comb and I'm going to vacuum bees and then I'm going to leave. They say, okay. And that's the way that agreement goes. I have yet to find someone who says, I need somebody that's going to fix my home when you're done. And I would explain to them, I had one earlier in Carmel this year, and we spoke to the homeowner and we said, we're going to cut this board, we're going to pull those nails, we're going to put the nails back, but you're going to need a painter for caulking and paint, for touch-up and stuff. So it's very situational. It depends on what you find when you get there. The 200-year-old house in Connersville, it was under renovations. There was already plaster dust all over everything, so we didn't have to clean anything. It was just, he needed the bees out so his contractors could continue to work. And he was happy with that. So I wouldn't say I'm an expert on the legal aspects of things. Up until this particular year, there wasn't really enough to do to justify spending money on paying an attorney for an agreement. this year's been special. We've had so many swarms this year. I came out of winter with 11 hives. I'm at about 30 now. I caught swarms, I did splits, I did cutouts, and it's amazing how many bees I have right now. And they're distributed in 7 different yards. So yeah, it's situational. Situation. So as far finding the queen, I get the queen about half the time. A lot of times the queen's very shy. If there's a nook and cranny that she can escape into, she will. And you'll never see her. I do my best. I have a queen club. In fact, I've got, I don't know, 8 or 9 of these. This is a man lake version. Daydant makes a very similar item. The sheet metal's a little thinner, and it doesn't open near as far. I don't know if you probably can't see it from where you're at. I'd say this one's opened about 1 inch. Man lake. Daydant is opened about, say, 9/16. Not quite as much. I prefer the wider opening. Other than that, they're functionally the same. I just prefer the opening to be a little bit bigger, so I have a better chance of not hurting the queens when I do find them. So I do a process called OTS queen rearing, on the spot. So I've learned along the way how to make my new queens if I need them, so I don't stress about not finding her. It's not a deal breaker if I don't find her. I'll just make a new one. Have the bees make a new one, I should say. I've had cutouts where the bees were so mean, one with John. There was nothing we could do to calm them down. Not enough smoke to calm them down. I've had bees on the other end of that spectrum. I lit my smoker, I left it outside the room I was working in, and I never touched it. I was in a t-shirt. I have like a pull-up sleeve that I put on, and rubber gloves, and a veil. In a t-shirt and shorts, I did a cutout, no stings. It just depends on what you're gonna find. You never know what you're gonna find. So be ready to put the suit on. Maybe you won't have to, hopefully you won't have to. So I'll go over a few things that I found while doing cutouts. I've never found a queen excluder. I've never found foundation. I've never seen where the top and the bottom of the nest has been reversed. So I like to follow a natural approach to my beekeeping based on what I've learned in nature. I don't use queen excluders. I don't reverse boxes. I really don't have hardly any foundation at all. So in my 30 hives, I might have 8 or 10 frames of foundation, and it's only because that they've inherited it from a different colony. And I'm finding since 2018, small hive beetles have been a big issue. They kind of came across the Midwest in a big wave that year. I lost a couple of colonies. They absconded, didn't kill them. The beetles stunk up the hive, caused the slime out, the beetles left. And almost every single cutout that I've done, I found beetles in various, infestations. Sometimes you find a couple beetles. Sometimes it's a mess. And there'll be comb that's full of the small hive beetles. You just have to throw it away. There's no saving it. Once the beetles take over, there's no saving it. So let's go over some of the equipment. What I have sitting here is my actual setup. It's a shop vac with a plenum. The plenum is very important when you're doing cutouts. Say, for instance, you try to pick up bees in this bee suit. There's not enough room in here for all the bees. So a shop vac all by itself, there's only this much area the bees will crush, and you're just going to kill a bunch of bees. If you try to vacuum, even if you have one of the big shop vacs that roll around the garage, it's not big enough. It's not going to cut it. Little side note, the zip tie, there's a valve in here. If you jump it over, or if you fill this with water, it shuts the vacuum off. I've defeated it with this because sure enough, I've kicked it over a couple times, and I've defeated that valve. So that if if I accidentally knock my vacuum over, it doesn't stop working. So you saw, I have the vacuum plugged into this hole. Simple enough, right? I have this extra hole on the other side. I come from an automotive background, so I call it a wastegate. It's kind of a turbocharger term. But it's simply that you can control how much vacuum you're pulling the bees with. You don't want to have to pull them. You don't want full vacuum on the bees. It might hurt them. I tune it down. You can see there's a little bit of a gap here. It's pulling vacuum through here so that it's not hurting the bees at all. This is the part that I call a plenum. The bees are drawn through the white hose there. The white hose is smooth. They're drawn in through here, and they're caught into the screen here. It's approximately a 5-gallon volume, and I have actually vacuumed enough bees one time that I had to dump them into nuke boxes and continue vacuuming. But for the most part, this is big enough. I don't think it matters what color bucket you use. I use the orange ones for this project. You could use any color you'd like. This is a nice feature to have. The black, it's called a wastegate. I think this one came from Menards. It's not required. It does kind of add a little bit of a niceness to it. You can just shut the valve and off you go. This works too. This works just fine. You don't need to spend the money on the wastegate. A lot of times when you put the hose through, it gets kind of stuck in it like this, and it stays there all day. So there's no worries about it accidentally pulling out because it's usually jammed sideways and it's not, that can't pull out anyway. So this works fine. No fancy wastegates, no fancy valves. Let's see. So if you're not a carpenter, if you're not into construction, if you haven't done remodeling, that sort of thing, if you need to remove bees from a structure, maybe get a carpenter to come along. They would probably use a tool like this. This is a little tiny saw blade that oscillates, and conveniently enough, the depth of this blade is about the depth of a 2x4, so that if you're cutting through a wall, you're less likely to hit something important. Electricity, or gas, or water. But this is the preferred saw, I would say. I've also been known to use a saw saw. Be very careful. Very careful. You're one gas line away from never doing this again. There's a good one. So, some of you, we've worked together, you know I'm cheap, right? Frugal. This cost me about 50 cents at a Goodwill. This is the #1 tool that I use in a cutout. For cutting comb, yeah, it's a Ginsu, and it's flexible. That's a key feature. Any knife that you're going to use to do cutouts, you want it to be flexible. You'll have situations where you'll have to pull your knife up under a comb, cut behind it to release it from a wall. And as you're doing that, you want to put your knife up against the wall like so to get a nice smooth cut through your comb. If you have questions about tool lists, I have a tool list compiled. It's on Indiana Honeybee Rescue. That's the site that I started a couple of years ago thinking, I need more cutouts, I need more swarms. I'll make this Facebook group and then everybody who has bees will call me. Well, it turned out everybody who wants the same thing as me got on that group. So if somebody calls me that has bees in a tree that's just too far for me, I share it on that Facebook group and it gets taken care of very quickly. A lot of like-minded people who like to do swarm captures and cutouts are on that site. And that's where I have my tool list. And and pictures of cutouts, videos of cutouts, other people who've done cutouts. Have I sparked any questions yet?
How do you get to the parts of the comb that are way back inside the floor joists?
Oh, good question.
That long one you have?
So yeah, I've definitely been on cutouts where they're deeper than this, and then you're gonna have to take your suit home and throw it in the wash because you've got honey all the way down here. This is an actual tool from an actual cutout. I had to run to Walmart to get a broom handle, duct tape. I had the pry bars on hand. When I did that particular cutout, I think it was about this deep. I had to push this tool into the back of the hive, cut behind the honeycomb, and then pull it out this way. When I had all the comb and all the bees out, then I threw a damp towel into the void and moved it around with this because there was no reach in it. So sometimes you have to improvise. I have another tool on the other end just for flat scraping. Let me show you a couple of different tools I'm thinking of. So I came to this particular building, this meeting, about 3 years ago. A gentleman held this up. He says, "This is my favorite tool." So, of course, I got one. And this is a very good tool for working your hives at home. Sometimes the comb is so deep in a void that you have to reach in and use the bent part to cut behind the comb and drag it out because you can't reach it. So this is a supplemental hive tool. I'd say it works just as good for home use. I wouldn't know that one would be any better than the other. The hook is kind of nice for pulling frames up, but you can do the same with this. When your frames are all propolized together, I like to use this bit here to put a little leverage between them to prime apart. This edge right here, exactly the same. But in the cutout situation, I like to have both. As you can see, the red's worn off of my older tool because I've scrubbed it so many times the paint's gone. I've done a cutout where I invited an assistant and they're like, "Oh, I have a 10-frame hive, we can put it in." Okay, and it was upstairs. By the time we filled that 10-frame box with all that cutout comb and had been going up and down the ladder for several hours, I was beat. And that's when I decided that's as heavy as I want to carry my bees in for cutouts. And it's the Easy Nuke. It's, what, 2 pounds maybe? This is what I carry bees in. Even if I know that the cutout's going to be more than 5 frames, this is a 5-frame box, I'll just carry more of these. I'll have extras. All right, so if no, sir?
So how are you, when you get the brood comb out, how are you attaching it to the new?
Excellent question. I'm glad you brought that up. You see the diagonal bit here? That's 2 file folder rubber bands. It's also, at Walmart, they're called 117Bs. It's the big rubber band. And so, if you can see that, it's a bit of a tray. I only put 2 on the back, and then you can lay comb on it. You can lay comb on it, and then work your smaller rubber bands. This would be just more of a standard rubber band that you might find. It's actually the most popular one. If you go to Walmart, you'll see a whole bin full of these. Then you can move these over to capture your comb so it won't fall out either way. That seems to be my preferred way. I started off with just the small rubber bands. It's pretty difficult. It's a bit of a puzzle to try to hold your comb in place without it falling out. So I saw a video, the guy put them on diagonal. They also wrapped them on both sides, but it builds up a bit of a thickness here, and when you go to put your frames in, it's just a touch thick. So I have a kind of a blend of both sides rubber bands. But if you're working with someone else, and if you're side by side on two ladders, it's real convenient to just hold it over to them. They lay their cut comb in, and then you can set it down and continue to go. What else can I tell you about cutouts before I move on to this hive sitting there?
Why do you keep doing it though?
Why do I keep doing it? You know, I don't know. It's a challenge. I feel like I'm doing something good by rescuing these bees. I'm helping the homeowners by removing something that's given them trouble. Most of us would have bees in our roof and go, "Ooh, nice." Most other people freak out when there's a single bug flying around. So I actually got a call for a cutout that turned out not to be a cutout. I get there and there's one beetle, not even a bee. It was like a stink bug, flew around. The lady about jumped out of her skin. I'm like, it's a stink bug. It doesn't have a stinger or anything. She wanted me to tear her back porch off, just in case the bees came back. I'm like, call me when they come back, and we'll get them out. But yeah, I feel like I'm helping the bees, I'm helping the people. And if you ever needed a treatment for PTSD, I'm telling you, when your hands are in bees and you're on a 20-foot ladder, you are not worried about anything else. You're not worried about paying your mortgage. You're not worried about getting a job. You're not nothing. You're not worried about what your wife was yelling about. None of it. You're so focused, and it's very, very calming. I don't know. It's like I've never jumped out of an airplane, but it's a thrill. It's quite a thrill.
So do you hang around until all the foragers come back, and if you do, how long does it take for all these foragers to come back to an active hive?
Right, good question. I usually don't wait too long, but I've usually been there for several hours and with the vacuum running, and I catch as many bees as possible, and I know you can't get them all, you'll never get them all, but you do your best. Gosh, I don't think I've ever left the box behind just to wait for the foragers. I just vacuum as much as possible. If they're on the comb while I'm putting them in, I just put them in the box. I do leave some nurse bees on the comb that I'm rubber banding so that they can attend to the brood. But as far as waiting, I may leave the vacuum out till last. I might start carrying the boxes of comb and the buckets, the cleanup buckets, and the buckets of comb that I've pulled out of the home. I may start packing that away with the vacuum still left out, and then get just one more last sweep. But no, I've never gotten them all.
Do you charge for your service?
Occasionally. In the beginning, I never did. Back when I needed bees, I didn't charge. I don't need bees. I went from 11 to 30. I don't need any more bees. When a call comes in for a cutout, I'm usually trying to find an assistant to take the bees. I don't want any more. I have charged when the guy says, "I'm trying to sell my house, I need the bees out fast." Okay, charge for that. The couple says, we have bees on our back patio, we're doing renovations, can you come and get them out? And I quoted them 2 prices. I said, for the high price, I'll come back tomorrow and get it myself. But if you need a discount, I'll find an assistant and we'll come back when they're available. They're like, oh, come back in the morning. So people don't mind paying a little bit. I've had customers pay, I've never asked for the money, and they would just hand me a check when I'm done and say, well, the exterminator was going to charge me this much, here's a check. Oh, okay. But in the beginning, I didn't charge at all. And I'm getting to the point where I don't need it anymore. I don't need the bees anymore. I don't need the danger anymore. I'm thinking about charging going forward. I guess it just depends on how many bees you need. And I really don't want more work. It's really a lot of work. I don't really need the work.
Have you ever found any bees or any type of flying insect other than Apis mellifera?
I have found evidence of previous residents. I pulled a colony out of a home in Anderson last fall. It was in a soffit. And as I pulled the soffit board down, there was a wasp nest about like so, a couple of layers that had been compressed to the bottom of the board. So you could tell that there had been previous residents. There was wasps there in the past. Oh, and of course, I get phone calls, hey, I've got bees, can you come and get them? And I show up, it's yellow jackets. So if it's June and they say, I've got bees, then you just go. But this time of year, if someone says, hey, I've got bees, you get a picture. Because most of the time, this time of year, is going to be yellow jackets. And I've had that call already this year.
And you won't get those?
I don't save yellow jackets, no.
So have you ever done, on these cutouts that have been there a couple of years or so, have you ever done bite counts to see how they held up against the row?
No,
Okay.
no. In fact, I've never done a mite count.
Do they look healthy?
Oh, yeah. One cutout that I've been on, I suspect that the homeowner sprayed them. They weren't healthy. Did they make it? No. They didn't make it. It was a tiny, tiny little colony, lethargic. I fully suspect that the homeowner sprayed them. Other than that, the bees that I have found have been very healthy. The cutouts that I do that did not get the queen, which is about half of them, they're getting the brood break. Like Tracy was mentioning with the device here, that you're doing a brood break mechanically. Sometimes the cutouts don't have a queen, they're getting a brood break automatically just by virtue of not having one. Some of them make their own queen, and I just let that ride. They make their own queen, they're fine. In the rare event that they don't make their own queen, 3 or 4 weeks into the process, if I'm not seeing queen cells, then I can combine a nuke with them. That's still a brood break. That's my mite treatment. All of my bees that I've had for the 4 years, I've never treated with chemicals. I use brood breaks exclusively. Is there a question over?
Have you had to go back to the same area that you've already moved bees from, or how do you keep them from coming back?
Not yet. Not yet. Whoever's going to do the repairs, it's usually not me. I will advise to the homeowner, or say to the homeowner when your contractor does the repair work, you might want to stuff fiberglass in the void to make it less appealing to the bees. We've done a cutout. The July 4th cutout was 3 colonies in one house. In fact, it was in one wall. Why we removed 3 colonies from one wall, we discovered the 4th colony in the same wall. Got that one later. Wherever stonework meets woodwork in a house, bees love that. We advised to that customer to hire a professional to fill the void between the stonework and the wood. But no, I've never been called back. I know that some people who do removals will take like Kills paint to knock down the smell. I've done things like stuff the entrance with steel wool. I've stuffed entrances with screen wire. And if the question does come up, I advise the homeowner to fill the void with fiberglass insulation. Otherwise, the bees will come back. What else? I'm going to move over to this weird-looking hive if we're running out of questions.
I just have, do you clean after your tools and equipment after each extraction?
I've yet to find a colony of bees in a cutout situation that didn't look really healthy, with the exception of the one that looked poisoned. And as I recall, none of my tools were used on that one. Or maybe they were. I don't remember. But yeah, I'm occasionally will take my hive tool and burn it with my smoker. You know, get a hot fire in the smoker, burn residues off of it, stick it in the dirt, that sort of thing. I'll do that. The cutout knife that I use once in a while goes in the dishwasher. Just, it gets really sticky. So I've had a question from an assistant this summer. He's like, what's the weirdest thing you ever heard while you're doing a cutout? I had to think for a second, and this spring, in April, we're an hour into the cutout. The assistant says, "Why am I so sticky?" So yeah, that's probably the best thing I've ever heard during a cutout. Why am I so sticky? All right, so moving on. This is a hive that I've designed based on studies I've read and my own experience. A gentleman in San Diego built one based from plans that I've drawn. He called it the Wren hive. That's my last name, so I'm going to go with it. I didn't call it that, he did, but I'm going to go with what he said. So there's some peculiar design characteristics of this hive, as you notice. One of the things that I was thinking when I designed this, I need it to be really weird. So I was reading articles. Beehives are getting stolen by the truckload. Hundreds of beehives at a time are stolen out of California. I'm thinking, I want mine to be so weird that if it ever gets stolen, there's no doubt about where it came from. So there's 3 legs. It's 7 frames wide. There's no like floor that we're used to. It's a totally different thing. So Tom Seeley, you know Tom Seeley from Cornell. He did some studies on what do bees prefer when they choose a new home in a swarm box situation. It's all here. He says the volume of the entrance needs to be the equivalent of a 1 1/4 inch round hole, but it can also be elongated, wide. It can be tall. The bees didn't have a preference of the shape of the hole, it was the volume of the hole. So this entrance is 1 1/4 inch diameter. The inside, that's something, if you're interested, you can come up and look at this later. The inside of the entrance is 2 inches off of the floor. Honeybee Democracy, Tom Seeley book. There's a drawing, 2 inches off the floor is what bees prefer. So that's built in there also. And like I said, it's 7 frames wide. Intentionally weird so that nobody wants to steal it. And if they do, I go, "Yes, sir, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor, this is mine. Here's the drawing. Here's a picture of me making one," or whatever. It's a little deeper than a deep frame. And from what I've learned from cutouts, bees don't care. They don't need this frame like we do. This frame's for us. This frame is for the beekeeper, not for the bees. So they'll go right onto the bottom of this, and hopefully they follow along here, and it's real easy to get in and out. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they'll come flat like this all the way through, all the way across, and when they get to the bottom, they go diagonal. So then I use my cutout skills and adjust a little bit, get that straightened out. It's heavy too. It's made of 2x4 material, or 2x6s and 2x4s. It's really heavy, but it's not intended to be picked up later. Once you place this, you don't ever have to pick it up again. If you want to see underneath the nest here, you take these wedges out. I have a habit of standing behind it. What do we have? 25, 30 of these? That's like the back of a horse. You don't stand behind a horse because it'll kick you. So I'm used to this with live bees in it. So if you see me reaching around funny, that's because I'm so used to not trying to walk around the front. So homemade wedges on the plate. The floor slips right off. So if you need to look up into your colony, you can hold your phone like this and get a nice picture, take it home and look at it later, which I've done just recently.
Is there screen or anything at the bottom of that, or is it just a hole?
It's just an open hole, so. Right, it's just open. Go ahead.
What is your bottom?
Okay, good. The sequence of this has changed over time, but this is what I've settled on now. The part that the bees touch is a piece of fabric. I used wax-coated fabric in the past. I've used wood in the past. The wood kind of gets rotten and crumbly. The wax-coated fabric holds a puddle of water sometimes. If a bee drops into a puddle of water in the winter, it's gone fast. It's immediately gone. So I'm just using just dry fabric, no wax. Yeah, it's called duck. It's canvas. It's Duckworks makes it. So I'm experimenting with just uncoated fabric. If the water hits it, condensation hits it, it'll wick out. And I have experimented with a shoestring in the past. If you put a shoestring in one of these on the lowest corner, if there's a puddle, it wicks out. And that's where I got the idea. The next layer is R5 foam insulation. I almost never paint the edge, but I thought, I'm going to be talking about this in front of a lot of people. Let's make a nice color on it. But it's just the green board that you buy at Lowe's. There's a pink board that you could buy at Home Depot, but it comes pre-perforated. It doesn't always agree with this shape, and it gets a weak spot in it, so I go with the one that's not perforated. And then a piece of hardware cloth to keep the critters out. In the past, this has been plywood. It's been sometimes nothing at all, and I worry about it. I mean, I don't know if in your beekeeping adventure you've ever worried about the bees. I worried about them, so I put that hardware cloth under it just in case a critter likes to crawl through, or go through the foam and eat the bees. I'm going to try to stop that with this. So
How
it's,
do you super that?
what's that?
How do you put a super on that?
How do I put a super on it? Like that.
Oh, right on top, okay.
Yep. So you can put a super on it. That's a custom made one. It's made of a 2x6, and I've used my top bars in it. Oh, this is how I take care of beetles. It's clear plastic that lays right on top of your frames. And you can do this in any hive. It doesn't have to be my special hive. Any hive that'll work. When you take your inner cover, slip it back a little bit. If you see a beetle, smash it. Slip it a little more if you see the beetle, smash it. See a beetle, smash it. And on you go. I can decimate all the beetles in all my hives in one day if I set my mind to it. It works so well I can keep them in the shade. And I've got plenty of beehives in the shade. Just because I have to. Some of my bee yards, there's no place to put them in the sun. There's a top bar I've come up with. It's intended to fit Langstroth boxes. The nail lines up with this edge board to make the spacing, the bee space, just so. They're interchangeable. The bottom box right now has got 2 frames and 5 top bars. Any combination works. I like to have a frame on the outside just because I pulled the outside first. And once you pull the first frame out, then you can see into the next layer. If it's attached to the wall, by virtue of being a top bar, sometimes they'll attach to the wall. You can just take the bread knife. And it goes in there just like so, separated from the wall, and then you can pull them right out. So, if you have just a plain box and you've got a large supply of 10 frame supers, which I know that's a very popular size in here. I have a 10 frame super. This strip makes up the difference. And off we go. So you can super with existing equipment. An 8 frame box fits on there with no modifications at all. It's the same width. The inside of this box being 7 frames wide and double thick just coincidentally makes it exactly the same width as an 8 frame box. So no modifications required. But I had a couple extra 10s. I added a strip of wood. Bees love it. They don't seem to care. I mean, the boxes are for us, not for the bees. So, oh, and the lid. Just made it today. It's roof flashing. I draw some lines on it, cut some corners, do a little bending, a couple rivets. I make these from scratch. Another design thought that I have in mind when I designed this was I wanted everything to be able to come readily from just any old hardware store. It's standard lumber, it's roof flashing, rivets come off the shelf just like everything else. Now, John and I we're both fond of going to the cutoff, what do they call it, the coal rack?
Oh, I don't want anybody to know about
Oh, okay.
It's the discount, the cold, yeah, the cold bin.
Yeah, so there's, usually at Home Depot, there's a little cart in the back with the cheap lumber. It's 70% off.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Oh, now we know.
so that's where I've been getting all my supplies. If you see any of my equipment with a little touch of purple spray paint on it, you know I got 70% off. Yeah, all this stuff is readily available. It's exactly compatible with Langstroth equipment.
So are you gonna make sure you announce your phone number to everyone so they can call you when they have need?
Yes, I can do that. We have Sweet Melissa Honey and Hive. That's Sweet Melissa. She sells all the honey and all the lotion and I do the keeping, she does the selling.
So you worked a beekeeper before 3 years ago,
About 4.
and now you have an entire industry built around it.
Right.
I mean, it's pretty amazing
Right.
pivot, right?
Right.
I'm impressed.
Right, so, yeah, I think I study with intensity. Yeah, I've studied really hard.
I'm really impressed.
So, one way to find this is Sweet Melissa Honey and Hive. You can also find it on Facebook in the group called Rin Hive,
Okay.
WRIN, Hive. You can, where else? Oh, it's on Indiana Honeybee Rescue. You'll see it in the background all the time.
Okay.
And I think that's my favorite group.
And then, would you also finish by telling us what we should tell people who call us with these problems? I mean, I kind of have a list, but what are the just basic questions we can tell people to make sure they're going in the right direction, other than don't spray them?
Yeah, somebody would call and say, hey, I got bees. Okay, in the spring, I just go. I pack up and go.
Okay.
Now, this time of year, and I would say July-ish, anytime July and after, get a detailed close-up picture of the critter itself, because especially, I always think of it as state fair season.
Right.
Whenever it's state fair season, yellow jackets are just everywhere and crazy.
And we are so familiar with honeybees, we don't realize that most people think anything flying.
Exactly.
is a honeybee.
Exactly. They'll say, well, it has stripes, and it stung my son. Oh,
It
okay.
came out of the ground near my mailbox.
Right,
Definitely
right.
honeybee.
So it's seasonal. It's seasonal. In fact, I still struggle with telling them apart if they're flying. If they're flying, I'm going to have to catch one.
Yeah.
I finally talked my parents into letting me keep one hive at their place. Because, well, last summer I removed a beehive that was about a half a mile this way, and then last fall I removed another one that was about a mile this way, and I said, look, all your bees are gone. If you want vegetables, you're going to have your own, right? I have one there. So every little thing that's out of the ordinary, well, something's going on with your bees. Okay, I'm on my way. And then I get the call, last was about a week ago. Bees are moving in our house. We had someone come and spray for bugs, and they said there's bees in the house. I'm like, all right, I'll be right up. Yellow jackets. Call your bug lady back and tell her she missed one, right? So yeah, tell them, don't spray them. Send me a picture. How high are they off the ground? Because I'm thinking, how hard is this going to be?
I sort of asked, do you see where they're coming and going from? Is there a specific place that you see them come, or are they just, do you see them going in by your window frame? And then I asked for a picture, even a dead one.
Right.
Close-up picture.
Yeah, exactly. Even a picture of a dead bug is really good if you're telling the difference between a yellow jacket.
A dead bug that's not been sprayed.
Yeah, that's not been sprayed. Yeah, the cutout bees seem to be really healthy now. I don't know if they figured out the varroa thing.
You're a number of hives now, you must be really a genetic encyclopedia. I mean, you've pulled them from so many different places. I would think you should move into queenery because you have
Oh, yeah.
genetics that not everybody can access. So I
Right.
think that's really kind of a cool thing.
And I'm at the point where I'm gonna have to start writing things down, but I can go through my bee yards and go, this one came from Wanamaker,
Right.
I found this one on Fire Hydrant, and this one came from Alexandria, and this one, and Connorsville, and so on. I captured a swarm August 30th, 2017, and they made it. And they made it. So now I have several descendants from them. Some are doing better than others, but
Well,
they still have their descendants.
I hope you go into queenery because I think that would be, that's a great marketing technique, just the genealogy or genetic material that you have
Right.
that most people wouldn't.
Right. And that's a good point. So studies have been done with the honeybee in North America, and they find that the feral bee that's been left to its own devices for several years starts to resemble the bee in Europe that is about the same latitude and environment. So the northern European bee will do well in Michigan, right? The Italian bee does good in Georgia because of the latitude. So if we start collecting the native bee, or not native, they're clearly not native, they're European, the feral bee. If you find a tree that's, we found a tree that fell over. And a friend of ours says, hey, there's bees coming out of this tree. It's right next to the grade school. Can you come and get them? We don't know how long they've been there.
Right.
They might have been there a couple of winters. They may have made it through that Arctic vortex of 2018.
Right.
So they've demonstrated that their genetic ability to withstand their environment.
That's why you probably do need to start keeping a catalog of which
Right.
hive came from
Right.
where. I think that would be a
Right,
good
and how long I've had them. If there's a special winter that they made it through, I mean, then they're more hardy for our particular weather. So I would encourage anybody that wants to keep bees for a long time instead of just for one summer, don't buy your bees from Georgia
Right, absolutely.
because they're good at living in Georgia. Our weather's dramatically different. So if your bees don't make it through winter, don't call Georgia again. Don't say, hey, hey, when you get that trailer load of bees, call me. No, find somebody local that has some extras or that can make a nuke for you.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks for coming, bringing all your stuff. Do you want to take a break or go right to you?
Happy beekeeping, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Let's take 3 or 4 minutes to everybody stretch and wait and invest their money in the lottery.
Say again? So the bees naturally chase the bees up. The bees chase the flowers. That's right into it.
Make it by the port.
Oh, yeah, and way, way down.
Yeah, no kidding. Can I text you my phone number?
Sure.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I need to, what's your phone number?
317-603-9875. This one's on.
Okay, do you all need?
No. No, I don't think those aren't tied in right now.
He said if you want to be wireless mic, he can hook you up.
Okay. That's easier, yeah.
And this,
So you have other numbers on top, like another line, I'm gonna say another fee for.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing. Okay.
This is the right size for us. That's super. You know the 2x6s?
And you have to.
No, that's a super. It's a 10 frame. We'll see how it
Seven frames, but he gets his from somebody up in Michigan.
Yeah, it's a bit odd.
Yeah. But it's much easier to handle. For me, anyhow.
And if you kept in a 10 frame, you realize they touched that.
Oh, yeah.
Test. Okay, so the audio level is good. Whoa. Okay. Am I going to get feedback if I'm near the other mic?
Really good.
Okay, am I going to get feedback if I'm near the other mic?
No, I've got the speakers.
All right, folks, we're going to try and get going again. Oh, Paul, we do have the speakers up in here. Hey, Paul. Paul, the speakers are up in here. All of a sudden, yeah. Oops. And we need, yeah.
Which one's yours?
The one that talks about honey extracting.
While we're doing that, I want to give a special shout out to Paul Phillips.
Yep.
Who has worked endlessly to get us technologically able to post our meetings online for people. So,
Not only has he worked on getting it working, but he also came up with a scheme for raising the money to do it.
wonderful idea. He works for Salesforce downtown, which is a huge corporation, and he put together a little GoFundMe page for the financing we needed to buy the equipment to be able to do this. And sure enough, within a week, he raised $1,000, which we are able to buy equipment. So thank you so much, Paul. Really, really much more.
All right, well, it's great to be back with everybody again, indoors, just like we're not in world crisis or anything. But I've really missed having these meetings, and I've really missed having the opportunity to talk to everybody. So it's just really nice to be back in the groove with this again. And as we're working out some of our technical difficulties, or not really difficulties, but we're ironing out some of the bugs on being able to do a simultaneous broadcast of these meetings while we're doing the live, because we still have a moderate-sized portion of our club that for a variety of reasons can't be in live meetings like this, and so we wanted to make sure that the club was available to them. And again, that's Paul Phillips largely, who's been the guy who's been leading the charge on that. So for those of you who have attended here over the months and years, and you know a lot of times I get up and I talk about journal articles, and I talk about research and what's going on in beekeeping today, or some topic of beekeeping. And I was asked if I'd talk about honey extracting, which is kind of a basic thing. And so I thought, well, I think, has anyone here, first of all, has anyone here never extracted honey? Okay, we got a couple people, okay, couple, 3, 4 people. So the rest of you, maybe you'll pick up something different. But, talking about honey extracting, it's one of the most basic things we do as beekeepers. I mean, we keep bees alive in boxes, most of us primarily so that we can get honey, and so it's something we're familiar with. I'm going to walk you through the process I go through for honey extracting. Everybody has a little bit different take on it, but this is the process I do, and we'll talk about a little bit of equipment. Some of it you may be familiar with, some of it maybe you haven't tried, and hopefully we'll all walk away learning something tonight. So I say when you talk about honey extracting, the first thing you need to have is a space. And most of us have a space that's suitable if we look around. Oftentimes it is a garage. Now this is a picture of my garage. It looks just like this. I need a map to get through my garage, okay? But a garage has a lot of things to recommend it for honey extraction, okay? One of the big things is that it's not in your house, okay? The kitchen is another place. Are we getting feedback on that?
No, you're fine.
Okay. The kitchen is where I hear a lot of people have their first honey extraction experiment in the kitchen. And they learn very quickly why extracting in your kitchen is a bad idea. It's a question of which do you like better, the mess of honey all over the place or the 400 bees who were in the combs yet who are now loose in your house. So generally I tell people, don't do the whole kitchen thing. You can make it work, but there's probably a better way to do it. The important thing is that you do it indoors, okay? Why do we do this indoors? Yeah. When you start extracting honey, you've got atomized honey all over the place. You've got honey smell all over the place, and every bee within 3 miles is going to want to come help you. And you will draw them like bees to honey. So you want to have a place that you can close off. And this is why we typically do honey extraction during the hottest part of the year, so that we can really enjoy that closed-in feeling. And we can just, I know when I extracted this year, I had to go change clothes twice. I sweated through everything I was wearing twice. So in addition to a space, we need some equipment. And again, people who do this a lot, people who've done it for many years, develop what they like to use. But a couple of pieces of fundamental equipment that you need to do honey extraction. First of all, you need some way of opening up the combs. People use different kinds of knives. This is my personal favorite. It is the Kelly uncapping knife. I don't know what it is about this thing. It's a nasty looking knife. It's made from a piece of industrial bandsaw that's been ground down to a point, and it is absolute magic. Works really well. John, you want to testify about the knife?
I love that knife.
You love that knife?
If I can bury it, I would. I'm Arkansas.
Okay. I was using a Ginsu, and I gave up the Ginsu for this. So I would recommend you look into this for your cutout business. But this is what's called a cold knife, and it's cold because it's not heated in any way. There are a variety of heated implements people have tried. I know a lot of people have tried the classic hot knife, which plugs in. Does anybody here use a hot knife on a regular basis and loves it? And loves it. Bill does. Okay, Bill does. You love yours too? Okay. I know a lot of people who bought one, tried it, didn't like it, and didn't keep using it. But I know other people just absolutely love them. Same thing with the electric plane. Barry McNulty, who's not here, he used the electric plane for years in his sideliner operation and loved it. And then smaller operations, you got capping scratcher and the roller punch. Does anybody here open up all their combs with a roller punch? No? Okay.
The pokey roller of death.
The pokey roller of death, yes. Another thing you need, in addition to an uncapping tool, is something to uncap over. Because the process of uncapping, unless you're doing punching or comb slicing involves cutting a sheet of wax off, and that wax needs to fall someplace, and there's some honey associated with it. I use a tool like this. This is a Hive Butler on capping tank. Tracy, where's Tracy? Where's Tracy? There she is back there. Tracy is the designer and manufacturer of these units, and they work very well. You can also, though, I started out using something much simpler, which was something that looks like this. Fits on a 5-gallon pail, and the frame just sits in here, and you just hold it up and you slice it, and the comb usually falls into the pail or mostly into the pail. But this is very low cost, low investment. So your uncapping tank of whatever sort you prefer is pretty important. And of course you need some device with which to extract the honey from the comb. John Foster brought us this beautiful example of an antique honey extractor.
That was used this year. Right?
That was used this year, that's right, because John is a genuine antique and therefore...
I lent it to somebody and I was going to kindly say that if anybody wanted to borrow it, they could.
It actually
Not
works.
you.
It actually works very, very well. There are two types of extractors. There are what are called horizontal and tangential extractors. A horizontal extractor keeps the comb. Can I borrow your comb? Whoops, that's a bar. Comb. A horizontal extractor holds the combs like this and spins them around. And so the honey flies off of one side of the comb. Okay? A radial extractor, I'm sorry, this is a tangential. A radial extractor holds the combs like this and spins them around this way, fleeing the honey off of both sides of the comb at one time. Okay? If you remember, the combs are not perpendicular to the frame. They're canted at 11 degrees. Okay? So because the combs are canted in that direction like this, the cells are canted like this, as they spin radially, the honey can fly out of both sides at once. So both types of extractors work well. The only difference is with a tangential extractor that holds the combs like this, you have to stop partway through, pull them out, flip them over, put them back, and spin out the other side. A radial extractor will spin out both sides at once. But you can also get them manually cranked, like this bad boy, and you can get a pretty good workout doing that, or you can go the motorized version. Who here is using a manually cranked extractor?
What we have him for.
Aha! You have your own motor with you. Yeah. And how many supers did you extract with that this year? Yeah. It gets old pretty fast. So some type of extractor. Then we need some way to separate the bits of wax and wings and legs and other bee parts that end up in our honey from the final honey. In the vernacular, we often refer to these as filters, but the term filtered honey has a connotation to it that we don't really enjoy. I usually refer to them as strainers. And I usually tell people I strain the honey enough to get the legs and wings out. That's about it. Pollen, you're not going to remove pollen with a filter like this. They come in a variety of sizes. The most common ones are 400 and 600 micron. 400 micron being the finer size and 600 being the coarser. That's the size of the openings. But you're not going to filter out pollen with those types of filters. You're just getting out the bits of wax and other bits of sludge that might end up in your honey. The other thing you're going to need is something to put the honey in once you've extracted it. I think a lot of people are using something just like this, 5-gallon food-grade buckets. You can buy them from a variety of sources. You're looking for ones that are marked on the bottom that say HDPE. High-density polyethylene are generally food-grade buckets. You can get them at Lowe's, you can get them at Menards, you can get them at the, I'll tell you my secret source, but if you go to the bakery at the grocery store, and you find the frosting buckets, and you ask them at the bakery if they have any empty frosting buckets, they'll give them to you for free. I've got all I need, so you can have the rest.
But you need to get those screw-on lids.
No, the snap-on lids work fine. And the screw-on lids, I'm not a big fan of the screw-on lids myself. I've had more trouble with them. But others like them real well.
Bakery a lot of times will have a variety of sizes and shapes
Yep.
and lids as well.
Right, but don't take the pickle buckets, okay? You cannot get the pickle smell out of the pickle buckets. There is no way. It's never coming out. So don't get that for bees. Lastly, and I think most importantly to my domestic happiness, is a roll of plastic. And I would shy away from the really thin, filmy stuff that's about like saran wrap that they use for drop cloths. You want something a little heavier than that, a couple of mils thick, that's going to lay down on the ground and you can actually walk on for a day. So here's an example of my honey extracting operation set up in my sanitary garage. It's actually cleaner than it might look. The floors were actually swept and mopped before this because I want to be careful and not raise dust as I'm walking around in there. But everything else is just kind of pushed off to the side. So this highly efficient example of home industry, I'll kind of walk you through it here. So first of all, you see I've got plastic on the ground. That's most important. Because if you don't put plastic on the ground, I guarantee you are going to attract honey everywhere you go. And the bees will come later and find you. Also, a little side note here, you can't really show it on a picture like this, but I usually wear sandals because it's hot out there. I slip them off when I walk off the plastic. Otherwise, being on the plastic doesn't do any good because I walk in the honey on the plastic and then I track it all over the house when I go in the house to get a drink. So, plastic on the floor. There's my stack of supers standing there waiting to get going. While I'm waiting to extract, after I've pulled all of my supers, I stack them up, I put a lid on them and I put a bottom lid on them to keep the bees out. If you go to all this effort to get the bees out of your supers and then you leave the supers sit open, you're going to fill them back up with bees. I've done that. It's a bad idea. Okay? I've got a bucket of warm/hot water sitting here. I'd been going at it a while. When I took this picture, you can see a bunch of wax floating on it. But that bucket of hot water is for two things. One is I keep my knife sitting in that bucket of water most of the time when I'm not using it. By warming the blade up a little bit in that warm water, it helps it slice through a little bit easier. It's also nice to have a bucket to rinse my hands off because they get sticky handling all this different stuff. So by constantly rinsing my hands off, I'm able to keep from making quite as much of a mess. There's my uncapping tank setting up there. And in the uncapping tank is my knife. You can see the handle sitting up there. There's my extractor. And then there's my filtering straining station. And I think the last one is off the frame, but I'm pointing at the window that's at the very top corner here. When I'm extracting, especially early on in the day, I cover up the garage window so I've only got one window in the building that I'm working in. Why would I do that?
That's where the bees go.
That's where all the bees go, that's right. So as the bees are coming out of the supers, as I'm emptying them out, they all fly toward that one window. And every now and then I go over to that window and I just crack it and let them all out. You also see I've got a fan running in there because it's beastly hot. And then back in the corner there, you can just barely make it out. I've got it. That's where one of my stacks of empty jars is. So that's everything that I'm going to be needing. And, oh yeah, there's the window. All right, so starting up the operation. Take a hive tool and start cracking those frames loose. You got to have a hive tool because they're all propolized in there and they've cooled off. They're not as warm as they were when they were in the hive, so that propolis is pretty tough stuff. And what you're looking for, hopefully, is a bunch of frames that look just like this. Nicely capped, fairly well filled out, not a lot of open. I will extract frames that have some open cells on them. Usually try and keep it to less than about 20-25%. And not too many of them. That honey tends to be a little bit wetter, but a lot of times if you check it, you'll find out that it's about as dry as the stuff that's been capped over, so I don't worry too much about it. I take that frame and I set it up in the uncapping tank. I've got this frame sitting up there in the middle of it, and it's got this nail screw sticking out of the middle of it. That's what I rest the frame on so that I can spin it easily. And I take the knife and I start running it down so the blade is resting on the frame on either side and it slices off that nice, neat capping strip. I won't tell you how many pictures I took before I got one that looked that nice. Most of my supers are 10-frame supers, but I run them with 9 frames in them. That allows the bees to build out the comb a little bit fatter and makes it a lot easier to uncap them. Also, it will generally yield a pound or two more honey per super that way. If you've done it right and it all comes out nice, you're going to end up with a comb that looks about like that after you've uncapped it. You may have a little bit left that maybe was a low spot, and I'll go back in with a capping slicer, which is this little gizmo here. It looks like a capping fork, but it's got little tiny blades on it, and it just cuts holes in those cappings. But you can also take a capping fork like this, or you can take a hive tool or whatever you want and just slice those little bits of capping left, or you can just not worry about it if they're not very large. Depends a lot. A lot of these things depend on how much time you've got and how many supers you have left to extract yet. So once I've got them uncapped, I drop them into, this uncapping tank is nice because it's designed to hold frames when it's not used as an uncapping tank. And so I can uncap, well, you can see here, about 3 or 4 frames and stack them in here while the extractor is running. And so I can get a couple of frames ahead on the next batch. Mine holds 6, so I can get most of a batch done and ready while I'm spinning out the earlier batch. Come on. Then it's time to drop them into the extractor. Most of them will take a variety of frame sizes. Some will just take mediums and shallows. Some need to be modified to take deeps. Some will take mediums and shallows radially and deeps tangentially, so it varies a lot with the type of extractor. If you're thinking of buying an extractor, take a very careful look at how the frames are oriented in the extractor, and so that you can maximize the space for the types of frames you use. Is anybody running all deeps for honey? Any masochists out here? Nobody likes lifting 100-pound supers? Deeps for honey, a lot of extractors struggle with taking deep frames, but this particular one will take them. Anyway, once you get the extractor loaded, you're ready to go. The only thing I pay attention to really when I'm loading the extractor is if I have a frame that is odd for some reason, either it's extremely thin or it wasn't filled out very well, I might hold it aside until I get one that looks very much like it, so that I can put them in at opposite sides of the extractor basket. An extractor is all about balance. Anybody here ever had to leap onto their extractor to keep it from running across the floor? John Scott has got a beauty like that he just got. It's it's run by like a 20 horsepower electric motor, and yeah, and it has 4 cement blocks underneath it to hold it in place.
Well, I don't know how much is actually needed, but there was a base that actually held
12 blocks to hold it still. A well-balanced extractor running with a beautiful high-speed electric motor is a thing of wonder. But if it's off and it's out of balance, it starts to go wonky fast. And usually what I've found is that when my extractor is out of balance, if I start it up and I get it spun up to the speed that I want and it starts shaking and rattling, I'll stop it, because what usually has happened is I have not uncapped something correctly. Sometimes I'll get in a hurry and I'll forget to uncap one side of the comb, and I'll have one frame in there with an uncapped, with a capped side of one of the frames. So usually out of balance means something is wrong, but once you get it spinning, you get a feel for how long it takes. You want those combs to be pretty dry by the time you're done. And in my case, I usually leave the honey gate open at the bottom of the extractor and I drain right into a bucket. Why, you may ask? Does he not drain it through his filter first? Good question. I don't drain it through the filter first because my extractor's legs aren't long enough to fit a 5-gallon bucket under them. Okay? That's a 3-gallon bucket there, and my filters don't fit on 3-gallon buckets. So I filter as a separate step. So there's another thing to look for when you buy an extractor. Will it actually take a 5-gallon bucket?
Or you can have it on a stand that has 12 cinder blocks.
Or you could put 12 cinder blocks under it and strap it to that. I use a separate station for my filtration. I use 2 filters stacked together. These are cheap plastic filters. I keep thinking I should replace them with nice stainless steel ones, but these plastic ones are really cheap and they work really well. So I haven't replaced them. But I stack the 2 of them together. I use a little pail bench on top of there, which if you don't own one of these and you do much honey work, it's worth like the $8 they cost. It allows you to balance a bucket up there and for it to sit for as long as you want, letting it drain while you go do something else. So I get my filters set up and I tip a 3-gallon bucket up there and let it run and put another bucket under the extractor and let it go. So that's my filtration process. So you've done the extraction, you've filtered your honey, what are you left with? Bottling, that's right. But before bottling, you got to clean up the mess. Okay? You got to clean up the mess. Beekeepers are a lot like farmers in the sense that we have one really expensive piece of equipment that we use once a year, okay? And then we spend the rest of the time cleaning it and worrying about it. So that extractor, cleaning that thing out, it's a mess. I try not to do it too often. In other words, I try not to extract too often. I have to clean it every time I use it. But you're left with a bunch of what are called wet supers, supers that you've extracted the honey from but have a lot of residue left in them. You also have, like there's my uncapping tank, also it's got a lot of honey in it. I will take those, throw them on my trailer, haul them out near, not at, but near one of my bee yards and stand them up like this and let the bees go at it. As you can see here, they were all over these. This last batch I did, I think they were on them for about 3 days before they finally got them cleared out.
Can you explain why it's near?
If you put them right near your hives, and depending on the time of year, you run a risk of inciting robbing behavior. The bees will basically get themselves into such a frenzy because of all of the fresh honey available that they will not only take the honey out of your wet supers, but they will start looking at the neighboring hives as a source of honey and just rob until one of the hives can't defend itself anymore and you end up losing a hive or two. So by putting them a little ways away, you cause all that excitement to be elsewhere. You're also left with some amount of cappings wax that you've sliced off all of those combs. Now there are some methods of uncapping that generate very, very little wax. Barry McNulty again uses a mechanical capping slicer. It's actually a series of very closely spaced blades that run down both sides of the comb and slice open the cappings without cutting any wax off. He generates like a handful of cappings wax. I generated, I think this year I ended up with 2 5-gallon buckets full of it, and then you end up with a bunch of honey. This particular day, I think that was 263 pounds of honey. So that was a pretty good return for a day's work.
How many hives?
That was off of 4 hives. I had a bunch that didn't produce honey this year because they were building, as it were. And then, of course, after that honey sits for a while, and why do we leave it sit?
Bubbles.
Bubbles. We want to give chance for all of the air to come up to the top and form that nice scummy white surface that nobody wants in their honey jar. So I usually let mine sit for a week or 2, and then it gets transferred into a bottling bucket in the house this time. And my wife is in charge of our bottling operation, and that's pretty much it. And then it's labels and lids. So, questions, observations, words of wisdom? Yeah?
How close is too close for your equipment to be dried out?
I wouldn't go any closer than about 50 feet. Probably twice that would be better. Doesn't take them long to find it. Yeah?
So when you bottle your honey, do you weigh each jar or do you eyeball a line on the jar?
From what I've been told, and this is actually, I actually have checked this. If you look at a standard glass jar, you see this bead right here on the jar. The center of that bead is supposed to be the fill line.
Okay.
And my wife and I both have science backgrounds, and so of course we checked. And almost to the 1/10 of an ounce, it's accurate. So if anything, we go for the center of that bead or a touch more, but that's pretty much exactly a pound.
So what are you doing to get the bees out of the supers? What are you taking on?
Yeah, good question. There are three most common ways of getting bees out of the supers. One is pulling out each comb, using a bee brush to brush them off, and putting the comb into a new box. Just keep doing that, keep brushing the bees off. That works really well. It is really, really slow. So if you have to do more than 1 or 2 hives, that's really not very practical. Probably the second method that's probably, I think most of us here have used or tried, is what's called a fume board. And that's a board that's placed on top of the hive, the lid's taken off. This fume board has a felt pad on the underside and some absorbent colored paint or plastic on the top that heats it up. And you spray a liquid on there. Usually, well, hopefully always a non-toxic liquid, but there are 2 kinds of liquid. One smells like aging vomit. It does. Anybody, am I wrong? Am I wrong? Okay. The other one smells like cherries and almonds.
Why would anybody use the first kind?
Well, because it works really well.
So does the second kind.
Okay, but one of those 2 kinds is sprayed onto the felt pad. That pad is put on top of the hive, and on a nice warm day when the sun shines on the top of that pad, it drives the fumes down and it pushes the bees out. If you get too much in there and it's too hot, you will drive them right out the entrance, but you will get them out of the supers, generally. For me, my luck is about 1 in 5 doesn't work for some reason. So if I'm using a fume board, I always end up taking some bees in every super. The third method is using a leaf blower. The commercial operators oftentimes will use gas-powered leaf blowers. You stand the super up on its side and you just blow them out. Doesn't seem to, well, I guess it bothers the bees at the time, but they seem to survive it. But you get really clean supers that way too. So those are the 3 ways I know of. Does anybody have an alternate method?
No.
Okay, Bill?
I don't use it, but Ed Lynn does. He uses what they call a bee skateboard.
Oh yeah, you're right. I forgot about his skateboards.
Takes the super off, puts that board on, puts the sugar back on, and then the bees go down into the bottom box, and then he comes back.
All right. But it takes hours.
It takes a day.
Yeah. Yeah. And a skateboard makes the brush method look fast, but it is the type of thing that you can put on and come back the next day and your supers are clean. So, yeah.
You're supposed to be able to use a fume board with hardly anything on it with your skateboard and it works well.
Yeah, actually using the 2 together would work, although I'm not sure I'd want to leave a fume board on that long. If you leave a fume board on for a day, you might come back to an empty hive.
With you guys helping, I shake all my bees off the first 20 minutes.
With a brush.
I shake them and I learned bees can't hang on to your frame if you hit a rhythm that they get along. And I really like to do that.
Like a cha-cha or a samba?
The confusion of all bees.
What song do you not go to?
When you're shaking them all off. And I really enjoy that.
Yeah.
We have a little assembly line going too, and we'll get the frame out and he'll run them off. And
I know that I have a little carrier that fits on the back of my SUV, one of those little platforms that plugs into the hitch, and when I went out to my last apiary, I had more supers than I thought, and I ended up getting about 8 or 9 supers on that carrier, and I had gotten 95% of the bees out of them, but out of that many supers, that's still a lot of bees. And I had to drive back through Grand Park on a Sunday with that back there, and I did not have anybody tailgate me because I had this cloud of bees behind me just kind of hovering around this stack of supers. Yeah, yeah. So, any other questions or comments? Yeah.
This question's coming from a man who literally walked in here off the street.
Well, welcome.
I had some toast this morning and I decided I'd like to have some honey. So I found a plastic squeeze tube of honey in the back of the pantry.
Uh-huh.
But it wasn't nice and clear like yours. It's very dark brown.
Right.
Should I throw that tube out or what?
No, honey, you tell people that honey is like beer or like wine. They're all different kinds, and the color and the taste of honey is directly associated with the floral source the bees were using. So in the example that I had up here, that bottle of honey was what I refer to as like tree honey, early season honey. So the nectar we get here in the early part of the summer from honeysuckle and basswood and catalpa tends to produce a really, really light honey. The stuff we pull later in the season that comes from more wildflowers is a much darker amber color. And if you, some people here in Indiana will put their bees out in big stands of tulip tree down south especially, and there they get a honey that is a dark chocolate brown color. So it all depends on the floral source, and they're different all over the country.
That was very dark. You mentioned honeysuckle. Early this spring, we were walking through the park right here, and a man was digging up a plant. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, it's European honeysuckle."
Amber honeysuckle.
Now, is that something beekeepers like to see removed?
They can't use it, it's too deep.
Yeah.
The flower is too deep, and it's a terrible, horrible, nasty plant. It should be burned.
But the butterflies love it.
Good fire. Yeah. So
You know, what is your interpretation of unfiltered honey? I have people asking me if I have unfiltered
Yeah.
honey.
The issue with filtration, and this is something that comes up, this has more to do with the commercial packing of honey, but consumers don't like crystallized honey because they think it's gone bad, okay, and they have to recrystallize it. Now, we all know that honey naturally will crystallize. There's only a couple varieties of nectar honey that don't crystallize, but natural honey crystallizes. The more particles there are in the honey, the faster it's going to crystallize. So if you filter, I mean really finely filter, like beer and wine are filtered through a filter pad, you can take out the pollen. And if you take the pollen out of honey, you've taken out these nucleus for crystals. And so that honey will stay in its liquid form for a much longer time on the supermarket shelf. But that's gotten out into the consumer world that, oh, this filtered honey has no pollen in it, it has none of the things that we want in our honey. So when people ask, do I have filtered honey? I say no. Okay? It's strained in the sense that we're taking the wings and legs out, but other than that, and the bits of wax, but other than that, everything else that's in the honey is in the honey.
I always look at it as, when they talk about filtration, they're looking at it more like, you would look at like a HEPA filter. We're talking about like microns.
Submicron, yeah.
That they're forcing the honey through.
Right, and that's what, and a lot of commercial operations do that. They actually heat the honey up so that it's more fluid, it's not as viscous, and then they can force it through these stacked filter pads. This is the same type of filters, like I said, that they use for wine and for beer commercial.
So even the 200 microns of fine filter like that, that's...
You're not going to filter out pollen with that, no. You will have a hard time getting your honey through it, but it will go, yeah.
I couldn't get honey to go through the 200.
You got to warm it up.
I even put it in the car.
Really?
With the sun beating down on it, and still wouldn't go through.
Wouldn't go through it? Yeah, I don't use a 200 myself because of that, because it's just, the only people I know who like to use 200 micron filters are the people who are competing in honey shows. And that's all about clarity. You know, they want the clearest honey possible. All right, thanks everybody.
Hello. 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 Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes. She can't hear you because I have it in space. Jeanette, we can hear you, but you can't hear us.
Okay, as long as you can hear me, that's what matters to me right now. Okay, we're going to renew the little talks that I had last year and year before about what's blooming right now. And what we try to do is what's blooming right now and what's going to be blooming in the future. And of course, we're pretty much in a dearth right now, but there are some things out there that the bees are liking. But before I get to that, I want to do a commercial. And my commercial is for milkweed. Now, when you think of milkweed, most people think of common milkweed, which has sort of rough-looking leaves and is not particularly pretty. This I have in my yard. It's called butterfly weed. It's a form of milkweed, great nectar source, good pollen source. It only grows about 2 feet high by 2 feet wide. It does have a long taproot. So once you plant it, be sure to plant it where you want it to stay, because it does not take kindly to being moved, because in most cases, you can't move it without cutting that taproot. It goes down so deep. This is a native, so that's one reason it has a long taproot. It's very suited to our Indiana weather with very dry conditions in the summertime normally, although we haven't had that this year. And so it thrives here. Blooms in July and August. And oops, just a second here. There we go. That's what the bloom looks like close up. Now, you think of milkweed for butterflies, for monarchs. It is a host plant for monarchs. And actually last year I was gone for a week and I came home and these plants were new, and I have a couple of them, as you'll see, and both of them were completely stripped of their leaves. And I knew that some monarch caterpillar had been around. But our bees also love them. I was out there today, and they're just about finished blooming, but there are a couple of blooms on them, and they did have my bees on them. Okay, right now, the bees very nicely pollinated them, and so they have these wonderful pods on them. Now, what I plan to do is leave the pods on them for a while, but when it gets close to the time that I think they're going to be bursting open, I'll cut them off except for a few of them that I want to save seeds to try to plant for next year. But actually, the pods are quite attractive. You can see they're kind of a rust colored and green, and they're really lovely. It also comes in this color. It's called Hello Yellow. That has been bred. I'm sure they took like the lightest orange blooms and cross-pollinated with the lightest orange blooms till they came up with this lovely yellow color. Looks like that. Okay, that's the end of my commercial. I just want to encourage everybody, plant some milkweed. You don't have to plant the common, I want to say ugly kind. This is lovely in a setting around your house or wherever. Now, we'll get going. But first, I want to say a huge thank you to Paul, who has spent literally hours getting this so that we can have the program simulcast out and recorded on YouTube so that people can see it tonight and go back and see it again later. Paul has spent hours doing it, and we really appreciate it. As well as Paul is the one who set up our GoFundMe so that we can buy the equipment to be able to do this. Thank you, Paul. Okay, so in August, as I said, we don't have very many things blooming. There are a few things around, and a big source for our bees actually are the annuals and things that people have planted around their houses. But there are a few things that we have. Anise hyssop. And this again is in gardens around the house, but it's also, sometimes you see it out in the fields. It's a native. And it blooms for a very long time, which is great for our bees. If you're in your hive and you happen to see some yellow-green pollen in there, then you know that they may be involved with anise hyssop. It's anise because the leaves smell kind of like anise, and it's a great plant. Okay, the next one is giant allium. Allium is in the onion family. You can see this young boy is in here with allium up over his head even, but it comes in all sizes and all blooming times. Some of it blooms very early in the spring, and then it blooms all summer. And then this soccer ball size stuff that you're seeing here tends to bloom late in August. Bees absolutely love it. You don't notice the onion smell when you walk beside it, but if you cut it or cut the leaves from it, you do notice that it's in the onion family. Good pollen, better nectar. Swamp milkweed, again in the milkweed family. You see the first word there is Asclepias, that means milkweed. And this is another one of the controlled nice milkweeds. Obviously this one has the pink flowers, blooms later so that you can have the Asclepias tuberosa, the butterfly weed, earlier, and then this one comes by later. Again, it's a monarch butterfly host, but our bees love it. You'll notice as we're going along that many of these things, I say, have good pollen, but excellent nectar. At this time of year, our bees are wanting the nectar. They use the pollen for raising young, and yes, they're raising young now. They're starting to raise winter bees, but they're not raising as many as they did in, say, May. So what they're looking for are plants that have a lot of nectar and some pollen that they can bring in to raise the brood that they are right now. This is one of the few annuals that I put up. It's called borage, and as you see, it's an annual herb. It blooms all summer, which again is great for our bees, and the bees absolutely love it. I haven't tried growing it yet, but I'm planning to next year. Joe Pye weed. You see this beside highways, especially in southern Indiana, and I go to North Carolina fairly often, and I see it all along the highways all the way into North Carolina. And when it grows in the wild, it's very tall. You can see with this lady that it says 4 to 6 feet, but that's probably closer to 7. But smaller cultivars have been developed so that you can use it in your garden, in your yard. And it's a good pollen and nectar source, and at this time of year, the bees are looking for anything they can find, and they really do like this. Sunflowers, of course. Sunflowers, again, are an annual. Super excellent pollen, great nectar source. It's the kind of flower that bees like to land on. So they can land on it and then stick their proboscis into all of the little compartments and get all of the nectar out. Bright yellow pollen, and it does contain a human growth hormone, but that really, it gets into the honey, but there's such a little bit of it because the bees typically are not feasting on a field of honey for 3 weeks. So we don't worry about that particularly. Fruit tree pollen also has human growth hormone in it. Basil. My basil is just starting to bloom. Looks very much like this. It's an annual herb. It's as an herb, I always say I don't know of an herb that my bees don't like. They just like anything from what blooms early in the spring until absolutely the very last of the herbs. They're just all over it, generally all day. And this does bloom for a long time. It'll be starting now and going on through September. Oregano, another herb. Now, my oregano is kind of finishing up blooming. It still has some blooms, but it has been blooming for quite a while, and it is just about done. But the bees are still on it. I go out there and I see the bees on the flowers that are there. This is a perennial herb. It says it's low growing. Mine actually this year sent out shoots that are about 2.5 feet tall, maybe something like that. So it is and it also expands. So you have to give it some room. Again, excellent nectar. And the pollen on this one is green. Japanese pagoda tree. I bought one of these a couple of years ago, and it was doing great. But in our crazy spring this year, where if you are around tulip trees, you know that they lost all their leaves in the frost and then had to grow new ones. Well, that frost got this, so I don't have a Japanese pagoda tree anymore. It was very young. But the bees love it because it's a late bloomer. It's wonderful. We're looking for things that they can eat at this time of year. Now, if we go into September, and of course there's not any, it doesn't mean that it's September 1st, something's going to stop blooming and something's going to start. So it's just kind of vaguely here. Stonecrop. This one happens to be autumn joy. There are lots of varieties of sedum with good pollen and nectar. It, again, is one of those late blooming plants that the bees love. This is great in your yard. I have some that I have around the standpipe for my well, and it covers it very nicely. Hydrangeas. This is a PG. PGs generally are very good with pollen and nectar. This particular one blooms late. I'm sure you've seen hydrangeas blooming all summer. This one typically doesn't bloom until late. Be very careful if you're going to buy hydrangeas, though, because a lot of the cultivars now are sterile, and you have to be very careful with them to see if these big, beautiful blooms are actually all sterile or not. Because if they are, your bees aren't going to come anywhere near them. Garlic chives, another herb. This one, bees absolutely love. I have some, and there are bees on it from, actually it's not starting to bloom yet, but last year there were bees on it from early morning. As soon as the sun comes up, it had bees on it. And as the sun was going down, it still had bees on it all day long. Some plants only produce nectar at certain times of the day. So you'll say, I never see bees on my whatever. Well, your whatever may produce nectar only first thing in the morning, last thing at night, or at 10:30 in the morning. And so if you're not there at the right time, you're not going to see bees on it. Garlic chives produce nectar all day long. If you think about it, producing nectar is an energy pull, drain on the plant. So plants are pretty careful in general about how much nectar they produce and when they do it. But the bees know the routine. So if they know if a plant produces early in the morning, they need to be there. Ironweed. I know this is a September thing. The ironweed at my house, and there's some in the pasture, is starting to bloom. It is very invasive, but it's gorgeous. It grows tall. This color, the color that's on this slide is very close to what the color is. Maybe the plant is a little bit darker, but very close to this. I say it's aggressive, meaning that it just spreads everywhere, but it's a wonderful pollen and nectar source, and the bees are on it most of the day. I find there are some times during the day when I don't see any on it, but they're on it most of the day. And the last one is goldenrod. Goldenrod blooms starting in late September, usually on into October. The bees love it. People talk about going near the hive and it has a terrible smell, and that's from the goldenrod, but it doesn't seem to affect the taste of the honey. It's just sort of the smell of the hive overall. Usually, we extract the honey before the goldenrod blooms, and so I always do anyway. And so I consider that I just leave the goldenrod honey for the bees for wintering. But if you go out to a stand of goldenrod kind of early-ish in the morning or just as the sun starts to hit it, it smells incredible, just absolutely incredible. So and it isn't just the wild goldenrod. The solidago is becoming very popular in home gardens, around landscaping around the house or whatever. There are varieties that only grow 3 or 4 feet high and are just covered with blooms and are absolutely beautiful. So if you're looking for something, some of these plants that are natives, look and see if you can find some varieties of them that you really like. For example, with the milkweed that I talked about earlier, if you don't like that bright orange, well, there's bright yellow, or there's swamp milkweed, which is pink. And so you can find things that work in your landscaping and in your garden. And that's it for this time. Thank you. Any questions? Nope. Okay.
Oh, yeah. That's it. Yeah, I just added that to my first page. Let's see. Yeah, I just added that to my first page. Let's see. Yeah, I just.
Not changing?
No.
Blame Jim, that's his equipment.
Fine for me.
Again?
You turn it on?
You hold it out here. You hold your mouth wrong.
You can advance them all.
Yeah, I got
If I can't get it.
What a wonderful time to buy raffle tickets, if you haven't already. Stretch your legs out.
Your battery shot. I'll advance you.
Okay, I've got each bullet point, so it's just All right, Carmel has a new beekeeping ordinance. They started out with a 2-page guideline that was developed or written up by an intern after he visited Dave Hocutt at his property, took measurements of his property. Very nice guideline. Next. Keep going. Yeah. So we ended up. There was one lone beekeeper out in southeast Carmel that the neighbors complained, said he had a dozen hives in his backyard. And so code enforcement went out and showed him the guidelines, but admitted that they're powerless to enforce guidelines. Therefore, some counselors decided that they needed to sponsor an ordinance, and if they had just codified these guidelines, which are very nicely written, I'd be very happy, but they started from scratch. They got a lot of beekeeping terminology and buzzwords stirred in a pot, and they don't make any sense. The scientific term for that is gobbledygook. So it went to the ordinance got sent back to the Land Use Committee. They welcomed myself and Dave Hocutt to come in and testify, or I thought, I didn't understand what the process was going to be. I thought we were going to sit around a table and hammer out the rewording of the ordinance. Well, what it was, the committee was on the dais in the council chamber, and Dave and I took turns testifying at the witness table. We talked for over an hour, but didn't make any real progress in rewording it. And then they realized, oh, it's awfully late, like it is tonight. And they said, well, why don't we just pass it back to the council with a positive recommendation and the promise that we will modify it during the council meeting. And then the counselor that sponsored it asked me to email him of what exactly changes we should make. And I sent him line by line, section by section, this is what it should be. And then we went to the council meeting. I talked to him just before the meeting started, and he said, oh, I forgot to print out your email.
Oh my gosh.
So he winged it. I wrote out some quick notes, but we just had a few minutes. So what he could remember, they made some minor changes. One of the other counselors astutely noticed that the section about a 6-foot fence all around your bee yard was just unnecessary, and it just didn't fit into the purpose of the ordinance. And the sponsoring counselor said, but what about a flyaway barrier? And they said, okay, how do you want to word it? And said, well, neither one knew anything about bees. They didn't know how to word it, so they punted. Says, well, we'll just leave it in the way it is, and they passed it unanimously. And there wasn't in that process any time for the audience to, I could have raised my hand and said, look, this is how you need to word it, but that wasn't part of the process then. So it went on. So let's see what we've got. What's in the ordinance? You're limited to 1 hive per 5,000 square feet of your lot, roughly. It's really odd the way it's written. A maximum of 8. A minimum of 3-foot separation between hives. No more than 5 feet high if it's on the ground. I guess no limit if it's on top of the roof of your house, which is allowed in the ordinance. Maximum of 12 cubic feet per hive. To give you an idea, 2 deeps and 3 medium supers is about 7.3 cubic feet. So that's a pretty good size hive. Setbacks, 15 feet on side yards, 20 feet from the rear setback. And then this one I have the burn about is a 6-foot high barrier that completely screens the view of the hives from all of your neighbors.
That's not legal. You can have that shot down pretty easily by a county judge.
Yes.
And you need signs posted warning people that there's live bees on your yard. Because now they can't see the hives because they're screened by the 6-foot fence. All right, so some accommodations, what they explained to me says, first of all, it says right in the beginning of the ordinance that this does not apply to agricultural land, and they explain that, well, a lot size of 2 acres or more is agricultural, so you can do whatever you want in there. If you're responsible, so this ordinance was designed for a single person. And they pointed at me and Dave and said, you guys we don't care about. Because you're going to do the right thing. As long as your neighbors don't complain, they're not going to come around counting your beehives or anything like that. Says, you guys that know what you're doing and are responsible, we don't care about. And you can apply for any kind of variance if, for example, the gas pipeline runs through my neighborhood, a 20-foot setback in my rear. Why do I need that if it's a utility easement right there? I suggested they put that into the ordinance, said, nah, that's too messy. Just apply for a variance and we'll grant it. And if you want more hives than 8, just apply for a variance and we'll probably grant it if you're a responsible beekeeper. So we do have a responsibility to be responsible and courteous neighbors, whether we're beekeepers or not. And these are my 4 steps of what we need to do. First, talk to your neighbors. I know in this day and age, we're busy, we stay in our houses, we don't know our neighbors. Get out and talk to your neighbors. Let them know you're a beekeeper and see what they think about that. Be responsible and considerate. My particular hives in my yard, they're on my back patio. They're less than 5 feet out the back door from my living room. They're 40 feet from my neighbor's property lines. I figured that's pretty considerate. Educate your neighbors. So I've come up, next slide, little flyer, and I'd like some people to take some copies home and vet that for me, make sure that what I've put in here is correct. This is something you can hand to your neighbors, explain. Honeybees are non-aggressive. Don't confuse them with yellow jackets, which are very aggressive. And contact information for the club. And then when you give them this flyer, next step is give them a free bottle of honey. That's their bribe to say, don't call the police on me. And that's the end of my talk. Sorry I blew it.
I just want to say that if you were around for the Fishers debacle about beekeeping, it was also started by one person complaining, as was the Marion County ordinance problem, which was the year before, also based on an irresponsible beekeeper who behaved badly toward his neighbors. I was on that property myself. He told me before it all began, he was proud of what he had been doing, pointing his beehives at his neighbor's fence, and they had a swimming pool. So every municipality is going to go through this. Please be responsible beekeepers. You cause so much trouble for everybody else who's abiding. So, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for being an attentive audience. Dan, you're ready to go.
You know what? I think some of these young folks that have been sitting there doing pretty good. I know when I was your age, I would have been all antsy, ready to get out of here. I think I need a little bit of help picking some winning tickets, you guys. What do you think? We're going to pick 10 tickets. Hey, you guys, listen up. I'm going to read the last 3 numbers only. All right? Pick a winning ticket. Oh, no. All right. 767 is the first one. And you can pick anything on the table. 767.
Last 4 digits, right?
Last 3 digits, Jim. 767.